Ireland has some of the coolest and weirdest folklore in the world. From giants to fairies, benevolent leprechauns that grant wishes and give out gold, to the screaming Banshee that will literally shatter your soul with her ungodly wail, Ireland has some truly awesome magical lore. Since St. Patrick's Day is coming up, I thought it would be worth looking at some of the folklore of Ireland and telling you about some of the magic of this Emerald Isle. The fairies of Ireland are believed to be descendants of a tribe of settlers to Irish shores. The Tuatha De Danann, one of the first tribes to arrive in Ireland, were magical and secretive people, and looked somewhat different to the rest of us. When the warrior tribes like the Milesians began to arrive in Ireland, the Tuatha De Danann were defeated in battle, but despite being defeated, they went underground, and they would not be forced to leave. The Tuatha De Danann became what we now call fairies, and these fairies are now blamed by local Irish people for all manner of things that they just can't explain, both good and bad. This is one of the reasons that the fairies in Ireland are mistrustful of humans, because of the persecution they suffered at the hands of the Irish. The fairies are considered part of the fabric of Ireland, and I mean that literally because the fairies are nature spirits. While their origins can be traced back to the Tuatha De Danann, they are now so numerous and varied that literally thousands of books have been written about them, as well as lots of awesome YouTube videos, including the one you're watching right now. Nestled to the west of England and Wales sits Ireland, a green, often wet island whose murky clouds and heavy rainfall will often darken the skies. Being largely unprotected from the harsh westerly winds, Ireland's weather can be pretty rough, and so it's only normal in this kind of situation for people to try to rationalise things with magic. One recurring legend in Irish folklore is the origin of the Giant's Causeway. On the northeast coast sits an area lined with thousands upon thousands of columns of rock, basalt to be specific. Science has explained that this is the product of a very strange but ultimately very natural phenomenon. It's a form of volcanic eruption and, according to science, entirely explainable. But that doesn't stop a good story, does it? The thing is that the tops of these columns form nearly perfect geometric shapes, specifically hexagons. Six-sided and totally flat, these rocky columns appeared to form gigantic stepping stones down from the cliff all the way to the sea. The name of this area reflects the story that surrounded the strange landmark. It's called the Giant's Causeway because it's thought to be the remains of an old raised path or causeway leading over the sea, built by a giant named Finn McCool, which is a cool name. It's a McCool name. Finn was big, even for a giant, and his size and strength went unchallenged in Ireland, but there was a competing giant in Scotland named Benandonna, and he fancied that he was the strongest, biggest giant, and so challenged Finn McCool to a fight. Finn took that challenge and so ripped chunks of rock from the cliff and threw them into the sea, so that he could make his way to Scotland. When he got closer to Scotland and saw the enormous size of Benandonna, Finn became scared and backed out of the fight, turning back for Ireland. On the way home, running for safety, Finn lost one of his boots on the shore, and this can still be seen today, a solid rock in the shape of a foot. When Finn arrived home, his wife, Una, dressed Finn as a baby and set him on the shore in an enormous cradle and waited for Benandonna. When Benandonna finally reached Ireland and saw the enormous size of the sleeping Finn, thinking he was a baby, Benandonna was terrified that if the baby was that big, his father must be enormous. So Benandonna also ran home and ripped the causeway up as he went, for fear that the Irish giant may try to make his way to Scotland to eat him. And this is why the other end of the causeway is in Scotland. There are essentially two giant causeways, one in Scotland and one in Ireland, both made of identical columns of basalt rock to those found in Ireland. Sure, that's spooky, but is it really as spooky as the howling of the killer fairy they call the Banshee? Pop culture has given the Banshee a pretty bad rap, but she actually dates all the way back to the 8th century and possibly earlier, and she wasn't always that bad. The Irish word Banshee comes from the Old Irish Banshee, or fairy woman. Having said that, the C in Banshee actually means other world, and so the word Banshee means woman of the other world, or possibly translated as the word ghost. She is usually depicted as either an old crone with white hair or a tall, very, very thin, possibly skeletal, woman dressed in white as if getting married. Banshees are thought to be the spirits of recently dead women, and traditionally didn't actually cause any harm at all. In fact, while her appearance does warn of death, it was actually very useful because she helps to prepare the living person for their own death by assisting in setting things in order. Quite a useful spirit to have on your side, actually, once you get over the fact of actually dying, of course. Some banshees can shapeshift into crows or ravens or even owls, which remains a death-omen bird in many cultures to this day. Interestingly though, banshees traditionally would belong to Irish noble families and would only appear to family members. The stories tailed off during the 16th and 17th centuries when English nobility went to Ireland to seize land, and while they could take the land and claim titles of their own, they could not inherit a banshee. So why the moaning? Well, in Irish traditional death rituals, crying or keening was a rhythmic sound women made to help dead souls pass to the other worlds. These keening women were respected as professional performance artists and an essential part of any death ceremony to help the dead cross over. Another name for the banshee is the ban cinse, or keening woman, and so it is thought that this is how the banshee helps in the transition to death. Okay, that was pretty dark. Who wants some gold? I am, of course, talking about the Leprechaun, that slightly inebriated, red-bearded fairy man who likes gold and doesn't want to hang out with other fairies, so he's always alone. Sad, really. But is he? Well, he is old, he's wizened, and he always wears weird clothes. Yet he's a very hard worker and skilled at making shoes, and it's actually thought that the Elves in the Shoemaker fairy tale is only one standalone story where leprechauns work in a team of 2 or more. But it's hard to say whether this is typical of the leprechaun or not, since different areas of Ireland call the leprechaun something slightly different, even if only by spelling it differently. It's thought that Rumpelstiltskin might also be a leprechaun, since he conforms to a lot of the mischievous traits that belong so firmly in leprechaun lore. He's always small, ranging from a few inches to a few feet tall, and always male. The other thing that doesn't really change is the fact that he makes shoes, and no one's really sure why. I guess those curly fairy shoes aren't particularly hard wearing. Talking of wearing, his clothes do change depending on the area, but he usually comes with a magic hat that allows him to travel long distances, a bit like Mr. Ben. Does anyone else remember Mr. Ben? No? Just me? Finally, and perhaps most importantly, is this little guy's penchant for gold, and he really does love it, and he will guard it jealously, a bit like a dragon. It's always located at the end of a rainbow, but that's actually not the only place it's stored. Being wealthy cobblers or shoemakers, and even making dancing shoes for other fairies, the leprechaun is a very wealthy fairy, and he hoards his gold in underground caverns, mountains, rocks and caves. He also carries a large amount of it with him in a very full purse, and if you can ever get him to be separated from his hat, you may have a chance of separating him from some of his money as well. Don't though, because mugging a leprechaun is just mean and it might backfire. He's only small after all. If you do want to find out more about fairies in your very own home, check out this video. I've put it just here. I hope you have a nice St. Patrick's Day. Please like, subscribe and ding that bell. Check out the description for social media and other links. And as always,
Stay magical.
From giants to fairies, benevolent leprechaun. What's the leprechaun? The Tuatha. Right. The Tuatha De Danann began. That's really difficult to say. Well, their origins can be traced back to the Tuatha. One recurring legend in Irish. When Finn arrived home, his wife, Una, dressed Finn as a baby. Weird. It is weird.